Hello, my name is Sandy Bowman, and today's date is, I don't even have a clue what date, it's November 21st. Jerry, is that the date? I didn't know what the first thing it asked for was for the date, and I don't know what the day is.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just start over and cut that all out.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, my name is Sandy Bowman. Today's date is November 21st, 2019, and I am the Executive Director of the Life Center where we're filming this today. And this evening I'm representing the Historical Society's Genealogical Museum, currently in Greenup, in Cumberland County, Illinois. And I'm hosting today's program. Cumberland County's People, Places, and Things. We are trying to preserve and create film memories of some of the unique history for future generations to access and enjoy. So I hope you enjoy this. Here with me today is Dorothy Cutright.
Hello, Sandy.
Hi, Dorothy. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank
It's
you.
so nice that we're here together, and it's
Right.
nice to be with you. We are so pleased that she's decided to join us, and she is, I would say, almost a professional history gatherer, and she's been gathering historical information on her family and different things about Cumberland County for quite a few years, following in the footsteps of her mother. So we're glad she's here. So we need to make sure we have your name spelled correctly.
Yes, it's spelled correctly.
Okay, so it's D-O-R-O-T-H-Y. And what's your middle name?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. E-L-I-Z-A-B-E-T-H. Cutright. C-U-T-R-I-G-H-T. And what was your maiden name?
My maiden name was McCandlish.
All right, and that's a good name in Cumberland County, well-known name.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about when you were born and how old you are today, if you wish?
Well, yes, I'm happy to. Well, I was born in 1929. Of course, it was at home, and home was in Cottonwood Township, about 5 miles northeast of Toledo. My mother and my father were Violet and Fred McCandlish, and I was born in what we call the home place. It had been in the family since about 1890. I am married to George L. Cutright. I was married to him in 1949, and we were married at the Cottonwood United Methodist Church. We have 3 children: Elizabeth Ann Cutright of Mattoon, George Cutright Jr. of Joliet, and Neil, who passed away in 1984 because of muscular dystrophy. My husband passed away very sadly on May 5th, 2019 at home. So I do have a birth certificate.
There. And you mentioned a little bit ago that maybe there was a problem with this birth certificate?
Well, I see Sumter Township. I don't know why it wouldn't be Cottonwood. But
Did you never notice that before?
I never did.
Isn't that something? Okay, but everything else is right. Okay.
Here's a picture of my grandmother and me. She
Oh.
was Emma Holsapple McCandlish. This is taken almost on the railroad tracks, just in the eastern part of Toledo. Harry Hall used to live there. I expect many people remember that. But they moved to the city when my father got married. I think that's pretty close to when they moved to Toledo. And here's a picture of me and my mother and father, Fred McCandlish and Violet Butler McCandlish.
So you're the first,
Yes,
the
I was
first
the
child.
Mhm.
Now, is this home place, this is where you were born?
Yes.
And is that house still there?
Yes, that's where Bruce lives today.
That's where Bruce lives today, and then he was born in the same house, probably.
Yes. My father was too.
And Bruce is keeping it up very nicely, I think.
Here's a picture of me and my brother and sisters where we look like we're pretty well fed to be the middle of the depression.
Well, your mother did a good job of
Yeah, she was a registered nurse, and she really wanted her children to have a good life, healthy life.
And these children are still all with us.
Hmm.
So she did a great job,
She
I
did.
would say.
The youngest one's 83, so
Okay.
so far so good.
So far, so good.
I have my certificate of baptism from the Cottonwood, probably Episcopal Church. I don't see that right this minute.
AME, wasn't it a Methodist Episcopal Church, I think, at that time,
Well, I just
maybe?
don't see it. But I remember Mr. Holmes was a minister. Heard about him. The minister for Cottonwood lived in Toledo, and he would walk out in the evening for youth activities, and on Sunday morning he'd walk out. And that's several miles.
Well, and it says here that you were baptized in your home, at home. You weren't baptized at the
Well,
church.
no wonder. Well, thank you for showing me
Well,
that.
that's okay. That would explain that.
I've just had this, but I never
You-
paid much
You
attention.
just said, here's my baptism. Mhm.
Well, here's my certificate of church membership. I've joined other churches in the meantime, but I am a member of Cottonwood United Methodist Church today.
I think it would be interesting to talk about some of those other churches that you've wound up joining, but we'll talk about that maybe a little later. But I know you're well-traveled.
Yes,
Well
we
said.
traveled.
So can you talk about, so you also said you married George Cutright. Do you have pictures of your wedding? Am I skipping ahead?
This is our marriage license.
Okay. Now, do you know where you were married? Maybe.
Cottonwood
Maybe.
United Methodist Church.
All right,
It was
very good.
Episcopal back then, I'm pretty sure.
Methodist Episcopal, I think so. Okay.
It's nice
Oh,
to
and
keep
that's it.
these certificates because they mean a lot now and 100 years from now.
They do. And it looks like there's two happy people there.
George was in the Army. He had joined the Army after he left high school and went to Eastern a year. He laughed and said he got 3 promotions and he ended up a PFC. But he got out in 1950, which is just before Korea.
Right.
He really had thought that he would make the Army his career, but after Korea came along, he changed his mind in a hurry.
Oh.
So-
Did he have to go to Korea? Did he serve in Korea?
No, he left the Army in February 1950.
Okay.
Then we lived with his parents a little while, and he got a job at General Electric in Mattoon, so that put the Army to bed for sure. It's not a very good expression.
And he had a wonderful career with General Electric. He worked
Yes.
there for many years, and well, we'll back up a little bit.
I like this picture because it shows us on Easter morning, and we're all dressed in our finery, ready to go to church. I remember the day very plainly. Well, there's my dad, Fred McCandlish, myself, Carolyn Auger, Donna Barnes, and Bruce McCandlish.
And I think Easter pictures taken are just such a tradition. I have so many pictures of us kids on Easter Sunday, because that's when you wore your finest, and the weather was finally good enough that you could go outside and take a picture, which most of the pictures back then were taken outside because we didn't have such fancy cameras. But the Easter picture is certainly a tradition. I don't see any baskets.
I don't even know that we had Easter baskets.
Bet you went to church.
Yes.
That's, okay, that's a
This is another picture of the same group.
Mm-hmm.
This was, I think I was 18 years old.
And
That's myself, my sister Carolyn Auger, Donna Barnes, and Bruce. Got a lot of pictures of the four of us. We're kind of a close group.
mm-hmm.
Well, would you like to talk about how the McCandlishes got to Central Illinois?
Yes.
Well, I guess I could begin at the beginning, which is that the first William McCandlish who came to the United States at Philadelphia for county air was 15 years old.
And county air
Scotland.
is in Scotland.
He came over because his father had passed away before he was born, and one of his aunts provided the money for him to get on a ship and come to the United States. So that was very generous of her.
And did he come over by himself?
Yes, he came over by himself.
And he was how old?
15.
Oh my. We can't imagine that today, can we?
No. Must have been very, very scary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the McCandlishes settled in Pennsylvania, and the fellow who came from Scotland was a Revolutionary War helper. He wasn't a soldier, but he might have provided some food or some blankets or something, but he was recognized as being an important person in the Revolutionary War.
Mm-hmm.
The McCandlishes stayed in Pennsylvania quite a while, and then they went on over to Ohio, and my grandfather was born in southern Ohio. He also lost his father before he was born, and he was only 15. The doctor told him that he had tuberculosis, and if he wanted to live another year, he would stay in the bedroom with the draperies pulled.
Oh.
So he said, if I've only got a year to live, I'm not going to spend it in the house. So he joined a party of people who were walking to Illinois. So he walked to Champaign, Illinois. I don't know why he went there, but he worked for a large farmer. And then he got very homesick for his brother and sister who were still in Ohio. So he asked them to come over to Illinois, and they did. They were both teachers in Cumberland County, which was a nice, prestigious job in those days. So then after they got in Cumberland County, my grandfather moved down there to Cumberland County from Champaign County. First of all, he set up a tile factory, which is a couple of miles north of where Cottonwood Church is now.
Oh.
But you know, that was so important because all the land was soggy, it had to be drained.
Mm-hmm.
So he had the tile factory for a while. Then he traded it for some farmland on the Hickory Corner Road down by Cottonwood Creek. I don't know exactly when he bought the farm that we call the home place because it's not connected to this tile factory purchase. It belonged to Mother's great-great-grandmother. She had lived north of Cottonwood Church, and her husband had drowned in a well that he was digging. So I don't know what that had to do with it, but she owned the land where my brother lives now, the home place, and she sold it to William McCandlish. So went from Mother's family to my McCandlishes. So those were scary times, but people really got through them well. Well, he met my grandmother Emma because on one of his trips back to Cumberland County, to see his brother and sister, he met her somehow. And she was a teacher too. So it wasn't long before they were married, and he moved down to Cumberland County. And that's where they raised all their children. They had 6 children. She did special work as a teacher, but nothing outside the home after they were married. And my grandfather, William, was a cattle buyer too. He had the tile factory, then he also was a cattle buyer. That's the same occupation that my father's brother Luke had. He went to Colorado and he was a livestock trader and rancher. So, well, let's see, my father's name was Fred Raymond McCandlish. He was born in 1893. He went to Jones School, which is it's on the Bradbury Road, about a half a mile east of Cottonwood Church. Just like all the rest of the family, we went to Jones number 16, and we were very proud of our country school. I think it gave us an excellent education. Everything was reinforced year after year. You learned it pretty well. Besides, we had wonderful teachers. You know how they had to keep order in a room that maybe had 30 kids, and there were always 5 or 6 older boys who would just go so far. But it was a very good experience. I'm always happy about that.
Do you remember any of your teachers' names?
Well, I only had 2. I had William Scott and Joseph Carroll. That's the only 2 I had. I don't remember any women teaching at Jones. I think it may have been that if you've got 25 or 30 kids, you want a man.
Yeah, maybe.
But we played basketball, softball with other schools on Friday afternoon. Even though it was a depression, there were enough parents with cars that they'd take the school over to Hickory Corner School or Silverleaf or Jones or King, Webster, and we'd have a nice ball game. Of course, we had a big school, so we did pretty well. My father was a director of the school, but he was a director for schools for at least 50 years. He was on the board that planned the high school and all the new school down there. He was always interested in education. Amos Cutright several times said that Dad started the first 4-H club in Cumberland County. And I know he was very instrumental in getting electricity to our county, to our part of the county. He had graduated from the University of Illinois, and he just had more ideas than most people had. So, again, my siblings and I were very lucky to have a family that was interested in things and knew what was going on, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And you've continued to be interested in education, and it's interesting you mentioned the electricity that your father was instrumental in bringing to the county, and then when you married George Cutright, he worked at General Electric.
Then my brother Bruce was instrumental in getting E.J. Water to come up anytime.
Any minute now,
Any
that's
minute.
what we hear. Yes, he was. I think the McCandlish family is busy and an activist family, I guess.
Pretty much, but growing up is just the way things were. We didn't realize that we did more things than the other kids did. Mother, I think, as I said earlier, her main goal was to keep us busy. We didn't get in trouble if we were busy.
Mm-hmm. So
we
you
all
said,
had our jobs.
So you said she woke up every day, and before she got out of bed, what was it that she did?
I do that.
You do that?
But I know that she did. She had her day all planned out. She'd get out of bed and start out on it and get it done.
And get busy.
Mhm.
How did you get to school and home again? Did you walk, or
Yes, I walked.
you didn't have a pony to ride?
No.
No.
There is a picture of me on a horse, but I think that was kind of strange.
Do you remember that horse?
No, I don't.
No. It says Ribbon. Dorothy and, isn't that what it says? Dorothy and Ribbon?
I think that's right. Mm-hmm. Would you like to talk about my mother's family?
Sure, yes.
Well, here's a picture of my mother in 1944. They're all Butler women. There is Famie Butler. She lived across the road. She was the one delegated to stay home and take care of Mom and Dad. And the other brothers and sisters went away and got married.
Now, how do you spell her name?
Phamy.
Phamy.
Famie.
Famie. Okay. Is she named after someone, maybe, or you don't know how she got that name? I've never heard that name.
And next to her is Julia Bidle Butler, married to my grandfather's brother. Excuse me. And there's Mother's sister, Golda Butler, Golda Carroll. And this is grandmother, my mother's mother, Eva Janes. She was married to my mother's father, but he had tuberculosis. And after he passed away, when Mother was in high school, she married Tom James, and then she went to Missouri to live.
Oh.
We really didn't see her very much, but she lived in one of these little travel trailers and quilted all the time. And then here's Aunt Iva Harris. She lived in Decatur. She was the executive secretary to the publisher of the Decatur Herald and Review. But she's the one who helped get Mother through nursing school. She and Uncle Levi provided the money so Mother could go up and be a nurse.
And where did she go to school? Do you
And
know?
Iva, her mother.
Where did she go to nursing school?
Oh, Decatur, Macon County.
Okay.
And then there's my mother, Violet
The,
Butler
okay.
McKinley.
The Butler girls. 1944. And this is at the home place. So you said your grandfather walked to Champaign County and then came on down to Cumberland. How did your mother get here? Do you know how her family got here?
Well, her family came to Philadelphia in about 1730. But they didn't go across Pennsylvania. They dropped down into North Carolina, where many people used that route. They went to North Carolina and then found the passage through the mountains. But it was easy because there were still Indians. One of the persons in their little town was scalped by an Indian once. So the colonies were very dangerous places. They really were. Things must have really been bad in Europe to brave the sea and then come clear over here.
And many people went back and forth several times. I think if I did that trip one time, that would be it for me. I would stay where I was.
The ships were so small, too.
Yes, and rough and...
Well,
So, where did you go to high school?
I went to Toledo. It was the first and the only class of Toledo Community High School.
Now, how did that happen, that it was the only
Well,
class?
that's when they were trying to consolidate the schools, and I guess they didn't know what to call it, so they called it Toledo Community. I remember once one of the professors up at Eastern said, "Did you go to Teachers College High School?" And I said, "No, this is Toledo Community."
And it sounded like a college.
It did.
Yeah. So is that the high school that's there behind Neil Tire now? Is that where that high school was?
Yes, that's what it was. I was in the band, played the saxophone.
Oh, front row. That's a big band.
It includes the grade school too, but
Oh.
it's pretty good sax. This is a page from my annual. I took my picture and put it on this.
So you were president for 4 years?
No, just the senior
The
year.
senior year, the 4, okay. And you were the secretary treasurer for a year. You were band all 4 years. Girls basketball, girls BB,
I suppose.
and senior, chorus, home ec, sophomore and junior, orator, freshman, sophomore, and senior, and the reflector.
That was the school newspaper.
Okay, so you wrote. Did you write, what job did you do on the school newspaper? Write articles or?
Yes, I did.
And pep club, 4 years in pep club, so you were busy. Your mother had a good plan.
My journalism got a start in grade school. Joe Carroll bought one of these things. I think they call it a hectograph. But it was a tray that had jelly on it, sort of. And you would write with a pen that was purple, and you put it on that, and it would absorb into the gelatin. And then you could have several copies of something. And to us, there in the little country grade school, that looked pretty miraculous. We were proud that we could do something.
Mm-hmm, make copies. So you went to school and then you went to Eastern?
For 1 year.
For 1
Then I
year.
got married. And it was 1967, 20 more years later, that I got my degree. But I was determined to get it, so
So you got that after you were married,
yes.
and did you have children when you were trying to do that?
Yes, I did. 2 of them were in Eastern, and Neil was in grade school, I guess. But George also was a student at the same time. He graduated the same year. He had decided he wasn't going to get anywhere farther than just foreman if he didn't get a college education. So for 3 years, he worked the midnight shift and went to school.
So he could go to school.
He really was a busy person. He had 129 women that he was responsible for in the lamp plant, plus family obligations and so on. Of course, he didn't do too much with the family because he needed to sleep sometime.
So what did he do with GE in his career? After he got his degree, then was he able to go further than foreman?
In a year, he was transferred to headquarters in Ohio, and he set up a pilot shop for photo lamps. That was when they made a lot of these flash cubes and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So we moved to Ohio, and then he went down to another place in Ohio where he was in charge of the manufacturing, getting it set up in a new plant. And then he was offered a job in Mexico. And he always said, I took everything they offered me because they might not offer me anything else. So we went to Mexico. He was a quality manager, and he was there for 5 years, and they wanted him to go to Rio de Janeiro to manage the plant down there. So we went to Brazil. He was there for 2 years. Neil and I were there for only 1 year. It's a much different place from any other place I know. There just isn't any dirt. Can you believe a place that has no dirt? These were the tops of mountains, and there just wasn't any dirt. Sometimes they'd haul some in at great cost, I'm sure. And there'd be a tree here or there, but nobody had yards.
It was all rock,
It was rock.
just the top of mountains. So you lived in Rio for a year.
Then he went back to Mexico as the manager of the Monterey plant. So he was very happy there. He really spoke Spanish very, very well. But if you look at him, he looks kind of Spanish, doesn't he?
I thought maybe Greek or something.
No. They say in the Cutright history that they lived for decades in Holland. They surely don't look like Holland people to me.
That's what I always kind of thought, but I didn't ever know. So you lived in Monterrey, Mexico. Now, did he learn to speak Spanish at the university, or how did he learn to speak?
No, he learned it on the job.
On the job.
He had a tutor too. He could just make those sounds. I can't make those sounds.
But do you speak and understand Spanish after living in Mexico for those years?
Not very much.
But a little, maybe.
Some, yeah.
Okay.
I can read it much better than I can say it.
So let's see, you were in Mexico before, and then you went to Rio de Janeiro and came back to Mexico in
That's
Monterrey.
right.
But where were you in Mexico the first time?
Monterrey.
Oh, so
That's the only
Monterrey.
place they have a lamp plant.
Oh, okay. Is that plant still there?
Yes.
Still in Monterrey, Mexico.
George enjoyed that place more than any other. He just got along so well with people. They were very nice to him. We had wonderful neighbors. So we really didn't want to go back to Cleveland, but as he said, you take whatever they offer you. So we went back to Cleveland, and he worked another 7 years. And he retired as a manager of facilities and planning for the International Lighting Department. So those 3 years really paid off that he went to school.
Mm-hmm. And so during those years when he was head of that international department, was there a lot of traveling then? Did you get to travel with him, or did
I
he?
could have, but I'm not that big a traveler, I guess. Well, I was very happy to go to Ephesus and Istanbul and the Black Forest, Santiago, Buenos Aires. I was content for him to call me every Sunday or write me a letter. And that was the way it was. It was really a team effort. I mean, I had to cooperate. I had to be satisfied, when he could come home after 3 weeks or 5 weeks. Well, I just did what I had to do. So. But it was rather exciting.
And where did you live at that time when he was traveling? Were you here in Cumberland County?
No, we lived in Cleveland.
In Cleveland, okay.
For 23 years. But that includes, he worked for International for 23 years, but several of the years we were there in Cleveland. So.
And you had children that you were raising?
Yes, well, Ann didn't go to Ohio. She was already graduated from high school. So she was married, and then she finished college. And George Jr. graduated from Eastern, and Neil did too. We have a picture of Neil receiving his. I don't remember seeing it today. Well, it's the one where the President Reeves of Eastern gave him his diploma.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Well, that's all right.
Okay.
But he wanted to be remembered for something, so he worked hard to get his degree, and he was happy with it.
So what did you say your degree was in?
Bachelor of Science in Education.
In education.
I was an English teacher and history minor. I taught in Illinois. I had signed a contract to teach senior English at the Cumberland High School, but George wanted to go to Ohio, so we went to Ohio. Then in Ohio, I taught 5 years, and in Monterrey, Mexico, at the American School Foundation for 2 years. So, and I would have continued, but General Electric told George that just one of us could have a work permit. They didn't think I should have one, so.
Oh.
So I stayed home again.
So they didn't allow you to work in Mexico?
Didn't want me to.
So when you went back to Cleveland, then did you start teaching again, or?
No, I took 3 courses from the University of Illinois to get my Ohio certificate back. But I didn't need to, so yes, I decided I'd had it. So that was it.
So you've worked as a teacher, and did you work anyplace else? Did you ever work anywhere else?
No.
What did you like the best about being a teacher? I'm thinking there wasn't a lot you liked real well, or you...
Well, at first when in Ohio I was teaching in a junior high, and the teachers there would say that they would rather teach junior high kids than senior high, and I thought, how could that be? But it's true. The junior high kids have more, they don't have any, they're not really focused on school when they're seniors and juniors. They just want to get out of there and have a good time. And the junior high kids are so full of enthusiasm, they want to learn things. And I like that very much.
So I understand you've done a lot of work finding out history on the local cemeteries here in Cumberland County. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that really isn't a fair statement because I'm kind of a come-lately person. It started, as far as I know, with Mary Holt. She was a Greenup girl who had gone to Washington, D.C., and when she retired about 1965, she came back to Greenup. Her brother, George Holt, had a paint shop, and of course everybody knew her in the community. I don't know how she did it, but she got everybody fired up to find out what had happened in the past so they could preserve it. I don't know how many people started using their maiden name, like Violet Butler, Mary Todd Greason, and so on. And it's surprising how many people were eligible to be members of the DAR. And so that got many of them interested in going over to North Carolina, for instance, and going to courthouses. And I think researching their own family was a very good way to start. Well, then after that, they started writing histories of churches and families and almost anything. The Genealogical Society published a quarterly. Anyway, the editors were Mary Greason and Violet McCandlish. The president was somebody from Mattoon that really didn't do knock that out, but he wasn't any good.
The work. Didn't do the work.
Martha Floyd of Neoga, Carrie Carson, Alice Lehman of Hazeldale, the archives, Olive Holsapple, and the librarian, Mary Shadwick. They had been publishing this quarterly for a while, and I have several issues of it, and it's very interesting. They did a lot of original looking into things in the county. So I have no idea whose idea it was that they should go out in the cemeteries and read them. I remember many a time Mother would get up in the morning, do her work, and then she would make a little picnic lunch, and then she'd go off to a cemetery, and other women were there too, and they would go with their clipboards, and they would try to read some of these things that were very difficult. Then at noon they'd have their little picnic, and then about 2 o'clock they'd go home. But they did that for a long time, years really. And after it was all put together, I again don't know why my mother decided that she would learn to type and she would put these on film. But she did it, and it took years, really. Very difficult to read, plus sometimes you could hardly read what the person who read it had written. So the first one was published in 1978, and the second one was done in 1995. What I did was just be a good daughter. My mother wanted me to take it over for a long time, and I said, oh, I don't want to. Then when we moved back in 1991, it looked like I was going to have to.
Yeah.
She was about 84, you couldn't expect her to go on forever. So George said he would help me, and we went around to several cemeteries, and there were some obvious things that didn't quite jibe. And we put the real reference address on all the cemeteries. I think that was something that needed to be done so anybody could find these cemeteries. Then in 1995, I published it, and I, of course, gave Mother and other people credit for what they had done. Mary Watson from, is that her name? Mary? Yes, Mary Watson from Florida said she would take all these records and she'd put them in the computer. She sat down there in Florida for months and did it. She'd been a secretary for NASA. She was a fantastic typist, computer person. I really don't know who would have put it in the computer if she had. So that was a wonderful thing that she did.
Well, just for the record, I just want people to know that because of what you did and what those ladies did, your mother and your husband and you, as far as we know, Cumberland County is the only county in the United States that has a complete record of all their cemeteries, of every name that could be read since 1964, and you ended up with about 82 cemeteries with over 24,000 names that the Cumberland County Historical Society now has and has available on computer for genealogical research. One of a kind because of what you did.
It's hard to believe.
And so it will never disappear now. It won't, go into someone's attic and be burned down or anything. It's preserved in several formats that people have. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing that's now been done after all that work. Now, Mary Watson, you said, was in Florida. So what connection did she have to
Well, her
Cumberland
maiden
County?
name was Easton.
Okay.
She would come back every year or so. And so she heard about this somehow.
Okay.
Because I didn't know her.
Okay. And so she contacted you and said she would be willing to do that.
Well, in 1999, I decided I'd had enough too. It was just so ungainly and big, and I had worked at it for about 9 years, but I'd sort of worked at it with Mother for 20. And I was just sort of tired of it too. So the Historical Society said they'd be glad to have it, and I was very glad to let them have it.
So now, is it maintained every day? It's added to and everything is kept up to date?
Unfortunately, sometimes people get into the cemetery and they don't make the newspapers. We found several of that. People come in, and maybe it's their family burying ground and they don't have to have permission.
So, #1 in the country.
It's a wonderful thing.
Yes, Mother would be very proud.
She would be.
She wouldn't be surprised, though.
No. Well, all her good work is going to be preserved. And that's the purpose of the Historical and Genealogical Society, and they've done the same thing with all the schools that have been in Cumberland County that they can find.
That is also very good.
And we have presentations here at the Life Center from time to time on the schools, and we'd also want to have one on the cemeteries.
Yep.
Maybe around Memorial Day would be a good time to have that next year. So
It would be.
we're going to try and do that. And I think people find it very interesting to stay in touch.
Did you want to talk about George's family?
Yes.
I've
yes.
got some things here.
Sure.
Well, the Cutrights are another old family. They're not as old as the Penningtons, but the Cutrights came not long after the Revolutionary War. Their Revolutionary War man was named John Cutright, and he was a landowner, and I think he was always trying to have new adventures, it sounded like, from his biography. But he was mixed up with some people who were going to go to the west and settle land and sell it. So he went with a party called the Massey Party, and they started out from Ohio around Chillicothe, and they developed some land in southern Illinois. And I've been looking, but I don't know why they decided to come to Union Township in Illinois. But they did come, and there had been 12 children. One of them stayed in Virginia, one of them stayed in Ohio. But the other 10 came, and that's where all the Cutrights in this area come from, is those 10 kids from Virginia. So they're all related as far as I can figure out, just to that one person. Well, George grew up in Mattoon. His father was Albert Leo Cutright, and his mother was Alice Cross Cutright. When I was just had known George a very short time, I realized that he and his cousins were in a unique situation. He had 14 first cousins who lived in, well, 2 or 3 sections of Mattoon, but basically pretty close. And they did everything together. And I remember one of them said, if we didn't behave, there might be Uncle Miner. He'd poke his head around the coal shed. All these relatives around. So he and the Cross cousins were always very close. His grandparents on his father's side were Oscar Cutright, Oscar and Cora Kogel Cutright, and Elmer Cross and Ada Greason were his maternal grandparents. He lived in Mattoon, grew up there. He had a brother, Lowell, who lives in Charleston, and his sister, Marilyn, passed away about 10 years ago. Well, George was one of those persons that, a child who liked to get into the alarm clock and take it apart and put it back together again. But I think that didn't go too far because they didn't have very many resources at all. It was more a question of how can we be more saving and how can we have enough money for school shoes and coats and things. But George said every Saturday morning, many Saturday mornings, he and some friends would go out and they'd look for glass and bottles and bottle caps. And they'd always sell them enough to the junk man so that they could go to the movies that afternoon. So he did have the movies he could go to. Well, George was very interested in being a member of Cottonwood Church. He always was ready to do anything that anybody suggested that he might do, and besides, he had some ideas too about what other people might do. So he was the head of the trustees when they refurbished the building in 2002. The building was 100 years old, so they had to refinish the floors, the ceilings, the walls, new roof, new wiring, new fixtures, whole thing. So he passed away May 5th, 2019 at home, and he still wasn't ready to go. He still had plans.
Is that when they restored the stained glass windows in 2002?
That was a rather fluky thing. I had to go to St. Louis because I had a lung problem. And on the last day, the last appointment, George was trying to find some company that would refurbish the stained glass windows. So we got out the yellow pages, and he called the first 2 and they didn't answer. So he called the last one, and that's the company that did the work. And they were the perfect choice. So they were just excellent workers. And that helped a lot because some of those windows were getting very dangerous, really.
So again, all that work by George, in this case, and your family, will last for generations.
Yes, it will.
And people will continue to appreciate all that work that he did while he was on the trustees.
It actually comes from this woman, my grandmother, Emma Holsapple.
Mm-hmm.
Her family came from the banks of the White River in Indiana, and her father was an exhorter in the Methodist Church, and her mother was a lifetime member of the Ladies' Aid. And they came to the Cottonwood area and, of course, went to church there because they were Methodist. And I think they're the ones who got Cottonwood to understand that you've got to do things by the book, and then you work hard too. But they always wanted things done just right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of people are very loyal to Cottonwood. And a lot of people in Cumberland County go to other churches and they're Holsapples, but I don't know if they know their Cottonwood history or not.
Well, hopefully we can do a program, one of these programs on Cottonwood Church
That'd be nice.
and the history behind it.
Got a lot of material on that.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us? This has just been amazing and wonderful today. I know that people many years into the future will enjoy watching this.
Well, I hope so.
I think so. Well, I want to thank you for sitting down with us today. I know this isn't an easy thing to do, but you did a great job.
Thank you, Sandy.
And
I do want the information spread around, but, well, I'm not a TV personality by any means.
who you are now. I think that we do need to keep this information. It's very important. We need to keep all this history. So because of all your years of work, working with the cemetery project and working with Cottonwood history and your mother's work, Violet McCandlish, and your husband's work, I think that the citizens of Cumberland County in years to come will appreciate all this work that's gone into this, and they'll be as amazed as we are that it's all here. How did they do all this? It's an amazing thing. So, and it's amazing what the Historical Society and Jerry's doing to make sure that it stays here. And they'll say, wasn't that nice that they thought of us before we even were born? They were thinking of us and what we might be interested in. So
That's true.
it's an important project. So thank you for your contributions. Thank you for spending the afternoon with us.
Well, you're very welcome, Sandy.
And
I was
bringing
glad
all
to do
your-
it.
Bringing all your information.